Well, you may be glad to know that I'm not going to talk about that reading from about John the Baptist this morning. I'm going to instead pick that lovely reading from the letter of Paul to the Philippians. Now, whenever I read St. Paul's letters, his letter, particularly to the Philippians, I have to stop and remind myself the circumstances in which he wrote it. The year is about 63 or 64 AD. That's about 30 years after the death of Jesus. He is in prison in Rome. In chapter 1, for example, he mentions the fact that he is in chains. And then he talks about awaiting execution. In chapter 2 and verse 17, he says this. He said, "I am being poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and service of your faith." I am being poured out as a drink offering. And what he's referring to here, unbeknownst to us, but known to the Jews at the time, what he's referring to here is to the sacrifices that were offered in the temple on a daily basis. And in these sacrifices, a priest would sacrifice a ram or a bull, but then he would take a cup of wine and he would pour it out by the altar. And that was to signify his own personal dedication and the dedication of the people to God, the giving of themselves wholly to God. The wine represented, if you like, their own blood being poured out. And so Paul uses this to refer to the fact that he's going to die, but that his dying is his offering to God, if you like, his pouring out of his own life in dedication to God. And so he's in prison. He is shut away, he is waiting execution. It's only a matter of time. And then, astonishingly, given the circumstances, he says this: "Rejoice in the Lord. And again I say, rejoice. Rejoice always. And again I say, rejoice." But what then, in the circumstances, what then is he there to rejoice in? What's the joy of being in his circumstances? He gives us three things. First of all, he talks about the proximity of God. He says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near." The Lord is near. I'm not alone in myself, but the Lord is near. And that word for near, the word for near in the Greek, comes from a word which means to squeeze or to press in. I remember thinking about this when I was writing this sermon, and I remember when I was 18, I experienced for the first time being on a London Underground train in the rush hour. And it was like really being one of those poor little sardines squeezed together into a tin. In fact, I have to say that it was the most intimate I've been with anybody outside my marriage. And I remember thanking God for deodorant, let me tell you. All the arms in the air holding on. But all I can say, what I want to use by that picture is to give you the idea of this squeezing in, this pressing in. The closeness of people, to me, was what Paul felt about the closeness of God to him, only closer still. And in fact, this wasn't unusual in a way, because Paul says in the book of Acts about God, he says that in him, in God, we live and move and have our being. In him we live and move and have our being. In other words, God is like the water the fish swim in, or the air that the birds fly in. But it's not the fact that God is that close to every one of us that he's bothered about. It's about believing it. It's about remembering it. It's about holding it in your mind, in your heart, in the situation which you're in. Because it should make a difference to our lives if we know it, if we really know it, if we really believe it. It should make a difference. Because what good is water unless fish actually swim in it? And what good is air unless birds know how to spread their wings and fly in it? We need to learn to live, says Paul, in the awareness of God, despite our circumstances, that God is with us wherever we are. But the question is, do we have that faith? Do we really believe it? Richard Birnbaum, who was a pastor who spent 14 years in a notorious Romanian prison because of his faith, once said these words, and I find them incredibly challenging, and I hope you do too. He says there are two kinds of Christians. There's those who sincerely believe in God, and there are those who just as sincerely believe that they believe. And you can tell them apart by their actions in decisive moments. Let me just give you that again. Listen to it carefully. There are two kinds of Christians: those who sincerely believe in God, and there are those who just as sincerely believe that they believe in God. And you can tell them apart by their actions in decisive moments. Paul did not believe that he believed. He really believed. And it was because of that that he rejoiced even as he awaited his execution. And what's more, he wanted the Philippians to experience the same as he did. Maybe not the execution part, but certainly the understanding, the awareness, the knowing of the presence of God. And the question is, do we truly believe that God is near, that God is in our hearts? Do we really believe it? Or do we merely believe that we believe it? What did the scriptures say? The heart is deceitful above all things. We can convince ourselves that we believe, and we don't. We only believe that we believe. And there's a world of difference. Anyway, that was it. The first of all, the proximity to God. And out of that proximity then, of course, flows prayer. It's a natural consequence of it. If you believe the Lord is near, then prayer becomes as natural as breathing. It's like the birds flying in the air or the fish swimming in the water. And so Paul says, don't be anxious about anything. Just think, he's saying this, okay? Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Here's Paul in his cell, waiting execution, cut off from everybody else, rejoicing in God because he's near, and praying and thanking God. Amazing. You see, if we truly believe in God, that he's near, then bringing our worries and our anxieties and our concerns to him is both natural and logical. Paul knew that and benefited from it. And it wasn't just St. Paul's experience, but the common experience of all God's people throughout the Bible. Just read the Bible from beginning to end, and you'll find over and over again it's the experience of all God's people. For example, in Psalm 66, verse 20, David blesses God, and it says, "Blessed be God who has not rejected my prayer or withheld his love for me." Or Psalm 118, which is a psalm of praise to God who is near and who hears us. And Psalm 118 says, "In my anguish I cried to the Lord, and he answered me. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? The Lord is with me. He is my helper." And how many have taken encouragement in difficult times from the words of Jesus? "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." You know, he can do that because he's always present through the Spirit. The Lord is near, through and in the Spirit. And so that invitation is not time specific. It's not just for the disciples or the people milling around him with their troubles and their anxieties. It's for all time, because the Lord is always near. And for the Christian, he is not only near, he is with us in his Spirit. His Spirit resides and indwells within each one of us. Paul knew the truth of that. As he went to God in prayer, he casted that great burden of his ending upon God in his cell, and he knew how to rejoice as a consequence. Because of that, because he found not only the Lord in his cell, but this amazing peace which he goes on to describe. He says, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And the peace that Paul is talking about here is a supernatural peace. He says, the peace of God, which surpasses or transcends all understanding. Not the peace you find away from the noise and busyness of the town or the city when you go out for a run in the country. Not the peace that descends when the grandchildren have finally gone home after a busy week and you collapse exhausted on your sofa and go to bed early. Put your pajamas on in the afternoon instead of waiting till last thing. It's not the peace that comes from the resolution of a long-standing quarrel or argument, or the peace that comes after battle when the conflict ends and the guns fall silent. No, this peace is a peace that transcends all of that. It is what Isaiah calls perfect peace. Thou, he says to God, will keep him or her in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed or rests on thee, because he trusts in thee. Perfect peace. It's a peace that comes from knowing that we are loved and we are kept by God. I remember many years ago, around Christmas time, going to Swansea to buy things. You know, there were shops in Swansea in those days. And so you had a choice. And I remember trying to get some last-minute Christmas presents for Hazel in Debenhams. Good old Debenhams. Gosh, what a lifesaver. Where's it gone? How impoverished are we? No more last-minute dashes, is there really? But it was the usual Christmas chaos. How many times... it was the Christmas chaos. And I went into the quadrant. And I always remember the chatter and the clatter of the crowd. It streamed through. The brass bands, the carols across the tannoy, the little stalls dotted about in the middle of the walkway, you know, with the people hawking their wares. I once bought some, some facial cream made out of, salt from the Dead Sea. She saw me coming. And it's in the middle of that chaos. And I remember all that, and the streams of people going through all the colours and all the noise and the cacophony. And walking through the middle of it all was a woman with her baby wrapped in a Welsh shawl. And the baby was completely, totally oblivious to everything and sleeping. The sleep of the innocent and the just. Totally oblivious. And that to me is a picture of this perfect peace. The baby knew that peace because it was pressed close to its mother, and it felt the steady heartbeat of her love. It's like an oasis in the middle of all that. And I think that gives us some sense of what Paul was feeling in his cell as he rejoiced in the proximity of God, as he cast his burdens on the Lord in prayer, and as he experienced this divine peace that transcends all understanding, even as he awaited his own demise, his own execution. He knew that, and that sustained him so much that he could say, rejoice. Rejoice always. And again I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all. The Lord is near. And all I want to say to you is it's the same God today. Same God. He does not change. He does not go along with the times, follow the culture. In Jesus, he has drawn near to us. And through his Spirit lives in us today. Do we believe that? Or do we just believe that we believe? My prayer this morning is that you will really believe that. And that not only you will believe it, and here's the key, isn't it really? If you believe it, you practice it. If you believe the Lord is near, you will pray. It will be effortless. Let me tell you. You'll be praying in your car, you'll be praying as you take the dog for a walk. Why? Because the Lord is near. If you think that God's a million miles away, why are you going to pray? You have to shout, don't you? Or have special prayers or whatever, special places. But if you believe the Lord is near, you could be in a prison cell, waiting execution, and you know the presence of God, and it will give you this peace that transcends all understanding. So even in the cacophony of what's going on around you, you'll be like that baby, pressed up against his mother's breast, listening to the heartbeat, and realizing how much God really, really loves you. May God give us that peace this Christmas, and may He give us the faith to believe and to practice the nearness and the dearness of God. Amen.